Quick question, how many of you are paranoid? Okay, don't raise your hands for that. But the way you would know when I ask the question is, are you thinking, where's the nearest exit? How do I get out of this place? What I want to do today is talk about what causes paranoia in organizations and how we can prevent it. But what I really want to ask is, what does it take to own a face that looks like this? Now, some of you already own that face. If that's true, change the question and ask, how could I own it more often? Or how could I spread it to others? When I started studying success a decade ago, there were 3 common answers: hard work, talent, and luck. Makes a lot of sense. Every successful person you meet has a great work ethic, has achieved mastery in some area of expertise, and has also been in the right place at the right time. But I thought something was missing from that picture: the way we interact with other people. If you count the number of interactions you have in your work life with colleagues, clients, and other groups, it's a huge part of everyone's job. But we knew very little about how those interactions shape success. So I started studying that. And it turns out there's an amazing quote by Robert Benchley that changed the way I saw the world and might change your worldview as well. Benchley said, if you really want to understand people, there are only 2 kinds of people in the world. We have those who divide the world into 2 kinds of people and those who don't. I thought that was profound because I'm a psychologist and we are always dumbing people down into 2 categories and oversimplifying it. And I swore that I would never do that. Which is why I'm proud to tell you today that if you truly want to understand your interactions in all their richness and complexity, you need not 2, but a whopping 3 categories. The evidence is actually overwhelming. In every industry, in every culture around the world, there are 3 fundamental styles of interaction. What I want to do this morning is introduce you to these styles and get you thinking about, what's my style? What are the styles of the people I deal with every day? And what are the implications of that knowledge for both individual and collective success? Are you ready? All right, I was going to go there anyway, but thanks for the affirmation. So your style of give and take is a mindset that you carry around whenever you interact with other people to exchange something of value. Could be your time, skills, connections, other resources. On one end of the spectrum, we have people that I've come to call takers. Takers are always trying to get stuff from others and avoid giving back unless they have to. Takers are great at social loafing, shirking. They will volunteer for interesting, visible, important projects and then leave the grunt work for everybody else. But somehow they walk away with the lion's share of credit for collective achievements. On the other end of the spectrum, we have givers. For me, a giver is not just a volunteer, not a philanthropist, but simply someone who enjoys helping others and often does it with no strings attached. So if you're a giver, you're the kind of person who shares your knowledge freely, who provides mentoring to the people below you, who shows up early or stays late to support the people around you. And many of us love the idea of being givers. It resonates with our core values. But we also know there are takers out there. So what most of us do is we become givers with our families and our friends. But at work, we choose a 3rd style, which is called matching. If you are a matcher, you try to keep an even balance of give and take, quid pro quo. I'll do something for you if you do something for me. And that seems like a pretty safe way to live your life. I wondered, though, is that the most effective and productive way to live your life? And the answer to that question is going to be a very definitive maybe. Now, in a second, I want to ask you to think about the givers, the takers, the matchers that you've worked with. Who's the most successful? And who's the least successful? But before that, I want to give you a chance to assess your own style. We all have moments of giving, taking, and matching. Your style is just how you treat most of the people most of the time. I prepared a short test that you can take to figure out where you stand on this spectrum whenever you're ready. This is the only thing I'm going to say today that has no data behind it, but I am convinced the longer it takes you to laugh at this cartoon, the more worried we should be that you might be a taker. Now, I like this cartoon because it reminds us that narcissists are one kind of taker, people with fragile, inflated egos who think that if I want to win, somebody else has to lose. But there's another kind of taker that's more common. It's someone who used to be a giver or a matcher and then got burned one too many times and learned the hard way. It's dangerous to be generous. So a lot of takers don't mean to be cruel or cutthroat. They just say the world is a dog-eat-dog competitive place, and if I don't put myself first, no one else will. There is a third kind of taker we won't be addressing today. That's called a psychopath. But the other two kinds of takers, the narcissists, the givers and matchers who got scared away, we can change their styles. I want to talk about that briefly a little bit later. But first, how did the givers fare against the takers and matchers? The data were clear from 3 different kinds of jobs. We had engineers, where we measure productivity based on how many favors you do for your colleagues versus how many favors you get back in return. We had medical students, where we track your grades as a function of how much you like to help others. And my personal favorite, salespeople. In sales, we want to know what happens to your revenue based on how hard you work to serve the interests of your colleagues and your clients, above and beyond your job description. Now, across these 3 jobs, there is one group that consistently performs the worst. And it turns out that it is the givers. In each of these jobs, the givers fail bigger than the takers and the matchers. The engineers who get the least work done are the ones who do more favors than they get back. They're so busy doing other people's jobs, they run out of time and energy to get their own work finished. In medicine, the lowest grades in medical school belong to the students who agree most strongly with statements like, "I love helping others," which suggests the doctor you should trust is the one who came to medical school with no desire to help anybody. And then in sales, too, the lowest revenue accrues to the most generous salespeople. I used to work in sales, and I found this a little bit puzzling. So I went through all our data sets, and I found one company where there was a guy with the highest giver score and the lowest revenue. And I asked him, how do you explain this? Why do you suck at your job? I didn't ask it that way. But what is the cost of generosity in sales? And he said, if I could be completely candid with you, I just care so deeply about my customers that I would never sell them one of our crappy products. This is a tragedy for givers. It's also a tragedy for organizations. We have 35 years of evidence that if you want to boost your company's profits, customer satisfaction, employee retention, even lower your operating expenses, one of the best investments you can make is to get more people to act like givers. Givers are willing to do stuff that's not in their job description, but critical to organizational success. And yet the data say they do it at their own expense. Givers make other people better, but they sacrifice themselves in the process. Quick example. Some of you will know the story of Kat Cole. Kat was the first person in her family to make it to college after being raised by a single mother who had to work 3 jobs to support the family. When Kat was 15, she took on 2 jobs of her own. She sold clothes in a mall. She also worked at a restaurant as a server. And Kat was a classic giver, loved helping others, didn't ask for anything back. So one day, a cook doesn't show up for work, and Kat races back into the kitchen and starts cooking so everyone has a meal. Another day, a manager quits, and Kat is the one to take it upon herself to organize the schedules. So everyone has their desired shift, the restaurant can keep smooth operations. Nobody really notices she's doing this or appreciates this. It's the kind of situation that drives Sheryl Sandberg crazy. We have a woman doing the lion's share of the giving and not getting recognized for it. And if the story ended there, it would be a little bit depressing. But then it takes a surprising twist and gets much worse. Kat ends up making it to college, first person in her family to go. And she is so busy helping others in her restaurant that she fails all of her classes and has to drop out of school. And this is what happens to a lot of givers. They don't secure their oxygen masks before helping others. Turns out that's not just good advice on an airplane. It works in life too. So if givers are the worst performers, who are the best performers? Generally speaking, most people think it's got to be the takers. And let me start with some good news. It's not the takers. Takers in most organizations rise quickly, but they also fall quickly. And they fall at the hands of matchers. Those of you who are matchers, we need you desperately because you believe in an eye for an eye, a just world. What goes around comes around. And when it doesn't, you know it's time to step up and become what you might call the karma police. Matchers, there's nothing you hate more than seeing a taker act selfishly and get away with it. Not fair, right? Which is why when you meet a taker, you just feel like it's your mission in life to punish the hell out of that person. And that way, justice is served. Some matchers do this in ways that are fairly bold. They will actually deliberately feed takers false information and try to sabotage their success. Most matchers, though, choose a more subtle but equally deadly ancient weapon, which is called gossip. It usually goes like this: don't trust this guy. He's a selfish bastard. And that makes it hard for takers to sustain their success because most people are matchers. And that means if you exploit one person, you can't just start over fresh in a new relationship. Right? There's a matcher waiting in the wings to spread negative reputational information about you. I've learned recently, though, that it's not only matchers plotting the demise of takers. Who else hates to see takers succeed? Yeah, exactly, other takers. If you are a taker, other takers are a threat to your success. So you will go out of your way to make sure that you are the only taker in a room and clear out all the other takers so that you can free ride on the backs of the givers and the matchers. If you add all this up, it's not to say that takers can't succeed, only that it's an uphill battle. Because you've got ordinary matchers plotting your demise, and you also have the most ruthless of the takers trying to make sure that you fail. So the logical conclusion is, it must be the matchers who are the best performers. But they're not. The data show in every job and every organization that's ever been studied, the best results belong to the givers again. Givers are overrepresented on both extremes. Look at the bottom 25% of performers, mostly givers. But look at the top 25% of superstars, and you will find more givers in that group too than takers or matchers. I thought this was a fascinating paradox, that helping others could sink your career or it could accelerate it. That good gals and guys have a better chance of finishing last than their peers, but also higher odds of finishing first. One way we can make sense of this is to return to the story of Kat Cole. So she's helping other people in her restaurant. She fails all of her classes. She has to drop out of college. She's 19 years old, and she gets a call from a manager saying, we're thinking about expanding operations overseas. Do you want the job? And Kat says, I'm not qualified. She has less experience and less education than every other candidate. But she gets the job because she's the only person who's worked every role in that restaurant. So Kat ends up getting sent to Australia, opens a restaurant there, does the same thing in Southeast Asia, Latin America. At 26, she comes back to the US to head up corporate training. Her career skyrockets from there. At 32, she is named the president of a brand that under her leadership today, 5 years later, is worth over $1 billion. Some of you might have heard of it. It's called Cinnabon. Now, you may be wondering, as I did, would a giver really sell gooey treats? Kat's response is, we're all going to eat this stuff occasionally. It might as well taste ridiculously good. What's interesting, though, is that Kat's story reveals that givers often fail in the short run but succeed in the long run. Right? In the short run, it was not that efficient for her to be cooking and organizing schedules, not her job. But in the long run, the time she spent solving other people's problems qualified her to solve the organization's problems. Helping others actually taught her new knowledge and skills. And that's one of the long-term advantages of being a giver, is you actually get more expertise than takers and matchers do. Of course, there's also a social capital dividend. Right? The relationships she built, the reputation she gained, were really powerful. But that takes time, and I want to know, what can you do to accelerate the success of givers? If you're a giver or you work with people who are. I wanted to give you a top 10 list of the most important steps you could take, but sadly I could only think of 3. So here's the top 3 things to do to promote the success of givers. Number 1, be careful about who you hire, who you promote, and who you surround yourself with. If you want to be a successful giver, what kinds of people should you hang out with? Givers, that's what I thought too. But the data tell a different story. It is nice to have the right people on your bus, but it's critical to keep the wrong people off your bus. The negative impact of a taker on a team is usually double to triple the positive impact of a giver. Think about it this way. One bad apple can spoil a barrel, but one good egg just does not make a dozen. I don't know what that means, but I hope you do. Now, you let even one taker into a team, and paranoia starts to spread. The givers will stop helping because they're afraid of the consequences. Whereas you put one giver in a team and you don't see an explosion of generosity. More often it's like, great, you can do all my work. So it's not actually about surrounding yourself with givers. It's about weeding out the takers. And if you do that well, you're left with givers and matchers. The givers will be generous because they don't have to worry about what's going to happen to them if they help. And the beauty of matchers is they follow the norm. In the presence of givers, matchers act like givers too. So you can shift the whole population of your team or your organization in the giving direction just by getting rid of the takers. How do you do that? My favorite solution was invented by IKEA. When told, make a chair and take a seat, the takers tend to take that very literally. Now, when you're evaluating people, I want to encourage you to watch out for a personality trait called agreeableness. Agreeable people are warm, friendly, polite, welcoming, nice people. Disagreeable people, more critical, skeptical, and challenging. Most of us assume agreeable people are givers, disagreeable people are takers. But there is no correspondence between those attributes. Agreeableness is your outer veneer. Is it pleasant to interact with you? Whereas giving and taking are your inner motives. What are your intentions toward others? So if you really want to evaluate others accurately, you can say, yeah, there are agreeable givers who are at the greatest risk for becoming pushovers and doormats. They're too nice. And then there are disagreeable takers who are easy to spot, but you may call them by a slightly different name. The other two categories are the ones that we forget. There are disagreeable givers in our lives. They are the people who give us the critical feedback that we don't want to hear, but we need to hear. They play devil's advocate, they challenge the status quo, they ask tough questions. And we need to do a much better job valuing those disagreeable givers, instead of saying, kind of prickly, must be a selfish taker. For those of you who are having trouble thinking about what it means to be a disagreeable giver, an engineer at Google gave me a great explanation. Said, a disagreeable giver is just somebody with a really bad user interface, but a great operating system. If that helps you. The other combination is the deadly one, the agreeable taker, also known as the faker. Those are the people who are nice to your face and then stab you in the back. And there's one country on earth that struggles more than any other in spotting the agreeable takers, because it's the most agreeable country on the planet. Yes, you guessed it, it's Canada. A few years ago, there was a contest to come up with a Canadian equivalent to as American as apple pie, because Canadians needed more national pride. And I thought the winning entry was going to be as Canadian as maple syrup, or as Canadian as ice hockey. But no, 4 million Canadians voted for the national slogan, as Canadian as possible under the circumstances. For those of you who are highly agreeable or slightly Canadian, you get this right away. How could I ever say I'm any one thing when I'm constantly adapting to please other people? If that's you, it's well to remember that just because someone is nice to you does not mean they actually care about you. So screen out those agreeable takers before they cause a lot of damage. The second recommendation is to think differently about how you give. So there was an amazing op-ed in the New York Times a couple months ago called Madam CEO, Get Me a Coffee, which I wrote. Just kidding. Now, Sheryl Sandberg and I wrote this op-ed about all this data suggesting that women and men are equally motivated to be givers, but women get stuck with all the forms of giving that are invisible but valuable. The office housework, the planning meetings, the taking notes, the organizing parties, but also the really critical mentoring behind the scenes, one-on-one problem solving. Meanwhile, men are much more likely to do the public knowledge sharing, look how smart I am. And I think we need to balance that out. Two ways to balance it. One is to make sure that men are doing their share of these tasks and that women don't get stuck with the lion's share of the burden. The second is to focus on where your contribution is greatest, to align your individual skills, your expertise with the ways that you give, as opposed to just accepting whatever kinds of contributions are asked for. The final thing to do, if you want to build a culture where givers succeed, or you want to be a successful giver, is to think about being a sprinkler, not a chunker. And then reverse that. So chunkers are people who say, I'm going to do all my giving in one day, or one block of time. Sprinklers try to spread it out, and that's what most people do. But the data show that if you do all your giving blocked into windows of time together, you actually get more energy and more meaning from that than you do a little bit at a time. So something as simple as saying, Tuesdays are my giving day. I'm going to set aside an hour or two to be helpful and responsive. And then I'm going to block out the rest of the week to get my own stuff done is critical to the success of givers. If you can do all this well, if you can screen out takers, if you can focus on giving where your contribution is greatest, not where stereotypes expect you to give, and if you can align your acts of giving with the time that's effective for you to get your own work done, you may get people redefining what it means to succeed. Takers think about success like a game of battleship. I'm going to sink all the other boats in the sea. Whereas givers are much more likely to try to become the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think that's the kind of world that I want to live in, and it's the world I hope you will help me create. Thank you.